Hey there, I'm Sarah. 5 years ago, I found myself sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot at 3 a.m., sobbing uncontrollably after my third consecutive 12-hour shift. I couldn't make myself walk back into that building. My pager was going off, my phone was buzzing with messages from the unit, and all I could think was, I can't do this anymore. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air while trying to keep everyone else afloat. That night, I nearly walked away from nursing forever. Instead, it became the moment that forced me to confront the reality of my caregiver burnout and find a way through it. What I didn't realize then was that my experience wasn't unique. According to recent studies, over 55% of nurses report symptoms of burnout, and the numbers are similar across all caregiving professions. Whether you're a medical professional, caring for an aging parent, or supporting someone with chronic illness, the weight of responsibility can become crushing when we don't have the right tools to manage it. Today, I want to share what I've learned since that breaking point in the parking lot. The strategies that not only saved my career, but transformed how I approach caregiving entirely. Because here's the truth. Burnout isn't inevitable. It's preventable and sometimes even reversible when we recognize the signs early enough. Let's start with what burnout actually feels like, because sometimes we don't even recognize what's happening to us. For me, it started with exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. I'd get 8 hours and still wake up feeling like I hadn't rested at all. Then came the emotional numbness. I stopped feeling connected to my patients. People I would have previously been moved by just became tasks to complete, bodies to medicate, charts to update. The cynicism was next. I started making bitter jokes about work, rolling my eyes at colleagues who still seemed passionate, questioning why I'd ever thought nursing was a meaningful career choice. And finally, there was the overwhelming sense of ineffectiveness, feeling like nothing I did made any difference anyway. Does any of that sound familiar? If you're nodding right now, please know that you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not broken. You're experiencing a natural response to prolonged stress without adequate resources or recovery time. The turning point for me came when another nurse, someone I deeply respected, pulled me aside after noticing I hadn't taken a lunch break in 3 days. She said something I'll never forget. The patients need you, yes. But they need the real you, not this exhausted shell who's running on empty. The most important person in your care is you. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But for caregivers, this concept can feel almost revolutionary. We're trained to put others first, to ignore our own needs, to push through. We wear our exhaustion like a badge of honor. I certainly did. So what changed? How did I go from that sobbing nurse in the parking lot to someone who's still in the profession 5 years later, now helping others navigate their own burnout? It started with recognizing that self-care isn't selfish. It's essential maintenance for the tools of our trade. And for caregivers, we are the tool. Let me walk you through the specific strategies that made the difference for me, and that research shows can help prevent caregiver burnout before it reaches crisis levels. Strategy number 1: boundaries are non-negotiable. This was my hardest lesson. As caregivers, we're often terrible at saying no. We pick up extra shifts, stay late, take calls on our days off, and extend ourselves beyond reasonable limits. I had to learn that boundaries aren't just about saying no to others, they're about saying yes to myself. For me, this meant creating literal physical boundaries first. I stopped checking work emails at home. I turned off notifications from the hospital's scheduling system on my days off. I committed to leaving on time at least 3 shifts per week, even when there was more to be done. One practical tip that helped me: I created a transition ritual between work and home. For me, it was changing out of my scrubs before leaving the hospital and playing a specific playlist on my drive home. This mental separation helped me leave work stress where it belonged instead of carrying it with me. The pushback on boundaries can be intense at first. Colleagues might make comments, supervisors might express disappointment. But here's what I discovered: the world didn't fall apart when I maintained my boundaries. In fact, it created space for others to respect their own limits too. Strategy number 2: recognize that stress management is a daily practice, not an emergency response. For years, my approach to stress was reactive. I'd work myself to exhaustion, then crash with a weekend of Netflix and takeout, wondering why I wasn't feeling rejuvenated by Monday. What I've learned is that managing caregiver stress requires small, consistent actions every day, not just occasional emergency interventions when we're already overwhelmed. I started incorporating tiny stress management practices throughout my day. 2 minutes of deep breathing between patient rooms. A quick text exchange with a supportive friend during lunch. 5 minutes of stretching before my shift. These small moments of self-care added up in ways that a sporadic spa day never could. One technique that was particularly helpful was something a therapist taught me called stress bracketing. At the beginning of my shift, I would take 30 seconds to acknowledge my stress level and set an intention for how I wanted to feel during my work hours. At the end of my shift, I'd take another 30 seconds to mentally close the bracket, acknowledging what went well, what was challenging, and consciously choosing to leave work stress at work. This daily practice helped me stop the stress accumulation that had been drowning me. Instead of letting it build up day after day until I reached a breaking point, I was processing and releasing it in small, manageable amounts. Strategy number 3: your physical well-being isn't optional. This might sound obvious, but how many of us prioritize patient care while neglecting our own basic physical needs? I certainly did. I'd go entire 12-hour shifts without proper hydration, eating lunch while charting or sometimes not at all, holding my bladder for hours because there was always something more urgent to do. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was teaching patients about self-care while completely ignoring my own body's signals. So I made non-negotiable commitments to my physical health: a water bottle that never left my side, setting alarms for meal breaks if necessary, and prioritizing sleep as if it were a medication my body required. Exercise was another game changer for me. I'm not talking about intense workouts. Sometimes it was just a 15-minute walk around the neighborhood after a shift to decompress. Movement became my stress release valve, helping me process the emotional weight of caregiving instead of carrying it in my body. What surprised me most was how these basic physical self-care practices improved my emotional resilience. When my body's basic needs were met, I had more capacity to handle the emotional demands of nursing. I was less reactive, more patient, and better able to maintain perspective when challenges arose. Strategy number 4: community is an essential resource, not a luxury. One of the most dangerous aspects of burnout is how isolating it feels. When I was at my lowest, I was convinced that I was the only one struggling, that everyone else had figured out how to manage the demands of caregiving, and I was somehow deficient for finding it overwhelming. What changed everything was finding my people, other nurses who could validate my experience without trying to fix it, who understood the unique stressors of our profession. who could laugh with me about the dark humor that gets us through tough days without judgment. This community doesn't have to be large. For me, it started with just 2 other nurses who became my burnout buddies. We created a safe space to vent, share strategies, and sometimes just sit in solidarity with the difficult emotions our work brings up. This small community became my lifeline. If you're feeling isolated in your caregiving role, I encourage you to seek out others who understand. This might be through formal support groups, online communities, or simply reaching out to colleagues. The simple act of sharing your experience and hearing "me too" can be incredibly healing. Strategy number 5, compassion. Fatigue requires intentional replenishment. As caregivers, we pour out compassion day after day. It's easy to assume this resource is unlimited, that we can continuously give empathy, kindness, and emotional support without needing to replenish our reserves. This misconception leads directly to what experts call compassion fatigue, a state where we simply have no more empathy to give. I experienced this as a growing numbness. Patient stories that would have previously moved me to tears barely registered. I found myself avoiding emotional connections because I simply didn't have the capacity for them anymore. The solution wasn't to push harder or force myself to care more. It was to recognize that compassion is a renewable resource, but only if we actively replenish it. For me, this meant seeking out experiences that filled my empathy cup, spending time in nature, reading fiction that moved me emotionally, or connecting deeply with friends and family who energized rather than drained me. I also learned to practice self-compassion, treating myself with the same kindness and understanding I would offer a patient. This meant letting go of perfectionism, acknowledging my limitations, and speaking to myself with gentleness rather than harsh criticism when I made mistakes. Strategy number 6, meaning and purpose need regular reconnection. Most of us entered caregiving professions because we felt called to help others. We were driven by purpose, by meaning, by the desire to make a difference. But in the daily grind, the paperwork, the bureaucracy, the system constraints, it's easy to lose sight of why we started this journey in the first place. When burnout was at its peak for me, I couldn't remember why I'd become a nurse. The purpose that had once driven me felt distant and irrelevant. Reconnecting with that sense of meaning became essential to my recovery. I started keeping a purpose journal where I wrote down one meaningful moment from each shift, no matter how small. Sometimes it was a patient's smile, a family member's gratitude, or a moment of connection with a colleague. Over time, these small moments accumulated, reminding me that my work mattered even on the hardest days. I also sought out mentorship roles and educational opportunities that allowed me to share my knowledge with newer nurses. Teaching others reconnected me with the parts of nursing I loved most and helped me see my career through fresh eyes. If you're struggling to remember why you chose a caregiving path, try this. Write a letter to your younger self, the one who was just starting this journey. What would you want them to know about the importance of the work you do? Sometimes, speaking to our past selves helps us reconnect with our core purpose. Strategy number 7, recognize when you need professional support. This is perhaps the most important strategy of all, and the one I resisted the longest. As caregivers, we're often the last to seek care for ourselves. We're used to being the helpers, not the ones who need help. When my supervisor suggested I speak with a therapist about my burnout symptoms, my first reaction was defensive. I saw it as an admission of failure, proof that I wasn't cut out for nursing after all. What I didn't understand then was that seeking professional support is a sign of strength and self-awareness, not weakness. Working with a therapist who specialized in healthcare professionals gave me tools I couldn't have developed on my own. She helped me identify thought patterns that were contributing to my burnout, like perfectionism and catastrophizing, and develop healthier ways of processing the emotional complexity of my work. If you're experiencing symptoms of burnout that don't improve with self-care strategies, please consider seeking professional support. This might be through your employee assistance program, a therapist who understands caregiving challenges, or even a coach who specializes in burnout recovery. You wouldn't hesitate to refer a patient for specialized care. Please extend that same compassion to yourself. Strategy number 8. Your identity is bigger than your caregiving role. This was perhaps my most profound realization. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed nurse to become my entire identity. When work wasn't going well, my whole sense of self was threatened. I had no psychological buffer between my professional challenges and my personal worth. Recovery from burnout required me to reconnect with the other dimensions of my identity: friend, daughter, artist, nature lover, reader, community volunteer. I had to remember that while nursing was an important part of who I am, it wasn't the totality of my existence. I started reclaiming time for hobbies and relationships I'd neglected. I set boundaries around work talk in my personal life. I practiced introducing myself to new people without immediately mentioning my profession. These small shifts helped me develop a more balanced sense of identity, one that could withstand professional challenges without crumbling. If caregiving has become your entire identity, I encourage you to gently expand your self-concept. What parts of yourself have you neglected while focusing on caring for others? What activities or relationships used to bring you joy? Even small steps toward reclaiming these aspects of yourself can create vital psychological space between your work challenges and your intrinsic worth. Strategy number 9. Systems change matters too. While I've focused primarily on individual strategies for preventing burnout, I would be remiss not to acknowledge that many of the factors contributing to caregiver burnout are systemic: inadequate staffing, excessive paperwork, lack of organizational support, and cultures that glorify self-sacrifice. Part of my recovery involved recognizing which factors were within my control and which required advocacy for broader change. I joined committees at my hospital focused on nurse retention and well-being. I became more vocal about policies that contributed to burnout. I supported efforts to improve staffing ratios and reduce administrative burden. Individual self-care is essential, but it's not enough. We also need to work collectively to create healthcare environments that support caregiver well-being rather than depleting it. If you're in a position to influence policy or culture in your organization, I encourage you to use that influence to advocate for sustainable caregiving practices. Strategy number 10. Recovery is a journey, not a destination. 5 years after my breaking point in that hospital parking lot, I'd love to tell you that I've completely conquered burnout, that I've found some magical formula that makes me immune to the stresses of caregiving. The truth is more nuanced. I still have difficult days. I still sometimes struggle with boundaries. I still occasionally find myself slipping into old patterns that contributed to my burnout. The difference is that now I recognize the warning signs much earlier. I have tools and strategies to course correct before I reach crisis levels. And most importantly, I know I'm not alone in this experience. Burnout recovery isn't about achieving some perfect state of balance once and for all. It's about developing awareness, skills, and support systems that help us navigate the inherent challenges of caregiving work. It's about progress, not perfection. So where am I now? I'm still a nurse, and I love my profession more authentically than I did before my burnout experience. I work on a unit with better staffing ratios. I maintain clear boundaries between work and personal life. I prioritize my physical and emotional well-being as non-negotiable aspects of being an effective caregiver. And I share my story openly with other healthcare professionals, hoping to normalize conversations about caregiver burnout and prevention. If you're currently feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, or disconnected from the meaning in your caregiving role, please hear this. Your experience is valid. You're not failing. And most importantly, there is a path forward that doesn't require you to sacrifice your well-being or abandon your calling. Start with just one small step. Maybe it's setting a single boundary, reaching out to one supportive colleague, or committing 5 minutes to daily stress management. Small, consistent actions create the foundation for sustainable change. And remember that by taking care of yourself, you're not just preventing your own burnout, you're modeling healthier approaches to caregiving for everyone around you. You're contributing to a cultural shift that recognizes caregiver well-being as essential, not optional. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love to continue it. Drop a comment below sharing one burnout prevention strategy that's worked for you, or one you're committed to trying. Subscribe to this channel for more content on caregiver self-care and sustainable approaches to helping others. And remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Your well-being matters, not just for your sake, but for everyone who depends on your care. Thank you for listening to my story. I truly believe that by supporting each other and sharing our experiences honestly, we can transform how we approach caregiving, creating systems and practices that allow us to serve others powerfully without sacrificing ourselves in the process. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You're doing important work, and you deserve the same compassion you so readily offer others.